The Halberstadt D.II was a biplane fighter aircraft of the Luftstreitkräfte that served through the period of Allied air superiority in early 1916. As the first ever biplane configuration fighter aircraft to serve in combat for the German Empire, it had begun to be superseded in the Jagdstaffeln being formed by the superior Albatros fighters in the second half of the year, although small numbers of Halberstadts continued in use well into 1917. Design and development. The D.II was the production version of the experimental D.I. Lightened to improve performance, it also featured staggered wings and a more powerful 120 horsepower Mercedes D.II engine. The side and frontal radiators that had been tried in the D.I. were replaced by a wing-mounted radiator, similar to that later used by the Albatros D.III and D.V. The two bay wings were very strongly braced, with the trailing edge a wooden member, as opposed to the wire cable common on many World War I German single-engined aircraft. Photographic evidence indicates that many examples were rigged with washout on the lower wings, giving the impression of a curved or twisted lower wing trailing edge. In some photos even the upper wings have a similar sort of trailing edge droop on the fixed section inboard of the ailerons. The cockpit was raised in relation to where it had been on the D.I., which required a dorsal turtle deck to be built up atop the rear fuselage to fare the cockpit into the lines of the fuselage. Lateral control was by ailerons, designed to use a single forward projecting control horn for one of the twin aileron cables connections, with the twin cables for each surface running from the lower fuselage outwards through the lower wing and upwards to the forward horns and the ailerons' lower surfaces. A common system for early German World War I biplane aircraft that had been used previously on the 1914 vintage DFWB iron-arm two-seater as just one example, and on the later Albatros D.I. fighter that replaced the Halberstadt D.II. in 1916. The Halberstadt Flugzeugwerke had carried out license-built production of Fokkers A2 and A.I. in that order during 1914, giving the Halberstadt firm a familiarity with the general empennage design of the Fokker M5 and M8 families of monoplane aircraft. However, there is no documented instance of Halberstadt's previous license building of another firm's airframes, nor from the 1912 origin French airframe that Fokker themselves copied having any direct effect on the very similar appearance of the D.I.'s all-moving stabilator surface to those on the Fokker designs. The D.I.'s all-moving rudder was somewhat more robust-looking than the comma-shaped, unbraced Fokker unit. The Halberstadt D.I.'s flying rudder did have a V-shaped transverse brace placed immediately forward of the rudder's diagonal leading edge, with its lower ends fixed to each upper longeron near the tail end to brace its uppermost pivot point. Although the D.I.'s tail surface design could easily have shared the typical Moran elevator sensitivity with the likelihood of poor control harmonization with the ailerons, the D.II was very maneuverable in skilled hands and could be dived safely at high speed. A single synchronized 7.92 mm LMG-08 Spandau machine gun fired through the propeller from a mostly exterior mount beside the starboard side of the engine cylinders. If the only performance figures available for the type are accurate, the Halberstadt fighter's speed and climb were little better than the Eindeckers and inferior to such Allied contemporaries as the Nieuport 11 and the D.II., but had earned the respect of Allied fighter pilots and was a preferred mount of the pilots of the early Jagdstaffeln until the Albatros D.I. became available. Operational history. Like other early German fighter types, the D.II was at first applied in 1s and 2s to the ordinary 6-aircraft reconnaissance units of Feldfliegerabteilung and of what would become the Luftstreitkräfte in October 1916. Then from February 1916 onward through the summer of that year gathered into small specialized fighter units, the Kampfeinsätze Commandos or KEK units. When the first true fighter Jagdstaffeln were formed in mid-1916, the Halberstadt was the best fighter available and was used by Oswald Boelk to demonstrate his famous pioneering air fighting tactics to the new units. His Halberstadt was painted bright blue, one of the first documented instances of the gaudy personal finishes applied by German fighter pilots to the mounts for the remainder of the war. In service, unlike the previous Fokker Eindeckers and succeeding D-series biplanes from every other manufacturer of the era, the Halberstadt built D-series fighters bore no marked flag-issued military serial numbers anywhere on their exteriors. The license-built Aviatik and Hanover constructed examples of the Halberstadt D-series fighters usually had flag-issued serial numbers on their rear fuselage sides. As the new Albatros fighters came into service, the Halberstadts were quickly replaced, although a few survived into early 1917. Manfred von Richthofen flew a red Halberstadt D.II for a few weeks in February and March 1917, after the spar of his Albatros D.III cracked in combat, armament and in-flight radio communication experiments, believed to have been first tried within the first 6 months of 1916. Future German rocketry pioneer Lieutenant Rudolf Nebel, then flying as a fighter pilot with Jagdstaffeln, one of the earliest German fighter squadrons within the Luftstreitkräfte, used a Halberstadt D.II aircraft of that unit in the first known German attempt at arming an aircraft with wing-mounted rockets as long-range armament. Lieutenant Nebel used a set of 4 improvised tubular launches, 2 mounted per side on the wings, with a signal rocket being fired from each tube for the unofficial trial. According to Lieutenant Nebel's apparently undated account, he took off on a defensive mission when 25 Allied aircraft appeared in the air near Jagdstaffeln's base. He managed to fire his improvised rocket armament at a distance of 100 meters from the Allied fighter formation. In their head-on attack, it scared one British pilot into surrendering as the British aircraft landed safely in German territory, with Lieutenant Nebel landing no more than 20 meters away to ensure the British pilot's capture. Just over a week later, Lieutenant Nebel used his improvised rocket armament again and blew the propeller off an Allied aircraft, causing it to crash land. In mid-October 1916, another attempt was made to arm a Halberstadt D.II with rockets, this time for observation balloon attacks with a more formal method, using éclats-like rockets mounted on the outer wing struts, the way that the French Nieuport 11 had been armed nearly a year earlier. Problems with the ignition system on the rockets prevented the system from being experimented with any further. In late 1916, the Halberstadt D.II was the first known aeroplane for an official trial, with a special unit named the FD Versuchsabteilung, with the FD possibly meaning Funktelegraphy of air communications, using radio communications in directing fighter aircraft. Flag sanctioned the test, which resulted in the creation of a radio telegraphy transceiver for the flight leader's aircraft, weighing 25 to 30 kilograms, along with the battery, aircraft engine-driven generator and aerials. Receiving gear for the other aircraft in a combat formation was similarly devised, with the radio receiver weighing 12.5 to 15 kilograms. By early 1917, the FD D. Versuchsabteilung was making combat trials with the radio gear with Halberstadt D.III and D.V aircraft, and by late September 1917 with the famous Jagdstaffeln unit commanded by Manfred von Richthofen, especially Jagdstaffeln. Later trials using the more advanced Albatros D.III and Albatros D. Virginia fighters used the gear for the first attempts at an air-based version of ground-controlled interception of Allied bomber aircraft, using visual ground spotters as the ground component by the Home Defense Kampfpanzerstaffel units. Variants. Aviatik of Germany built the D.II under license. It was originally known as the Aviatik D.I, but was later called the Halberstadt D.II. The Halberstadt D.III primarily differed from the D.II version in its substitution of the Albatros 290 kW straight-six engine, which differed from the usual Mercedes D.II powerplant in having its camshaft in the engine block and using pushrods to operate the overhead valves, rather than having a camshaft running atop all of the cylinders as in a single overhead cam engine. A total of 50 D.III examples were built by Halberstadt, with the first 30 ordered in July 1916 and the last 20 ordered in August 1916. The D.IV version, of which only 3 were built to an order placed in early March 1916, changed the wing bracing layout to a single bay, dispensed with the twin bracing struts for the all-moving vertical tail rudder surface, and used a Benz BZ-3 110 kW straight-six engine for power, with a small conical spinner for better streamlining. Tested by ADFLAG in October 1916, this type was rejected for further evaluation due to a poor forward field of view for the pilot. The D.V version was a less radical departure from the earlier D.II version and mostly differed from the D.II in having its four-member cabane strut structure supporting a central panel for the upper wing, rather than both upper wing panels' wing roots meeting along the centerline of the aircraft for better forward pilot vision. It also used the D.III version's Albatros 2 engine and changed the mounting position of the aircraft's 7.92 mm LMG-08 machine gun from the right to the left side of the nose. A total of 57 D.V aircraft were built, from orders placed in October 1916 and January to June 1917, with 31 of these being sent to Germany's ally in the Central Powers, the Ottoman Empire. Operators: German Empire Luftstreitkräfte, Ottoman Empire Ottoman Air Force. Halberstadt D-Series production. Halberstadt D-Series production. Specifications. Data from Ray Wagner and Heinz Nowora. German combat planes. A comprehensive survey and history of the development of German military aircraft from 1914 to 1945. New York, Doubleday, 1971. And Gross, Peter M. Halberstadt Fighters Classics of World War I Aviation, Volume 1. Berkhamsted, Hertfordshire, UK. Albatros Publications, 1996. ISBN 0948-41486-3. General characteristics: crew 1, pilot, length 7.3 meters, wingspan 8.8 meters, height 2.66 meters, wing area 23.6 square meters, empty weight 519 kilograms. Loaded weight 728.5 kilograms. Power plant 1 times Mercedes D.II 6-cylinder inline 90 kilowatts. Performance maximum speed 150 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling 4,000 meters. Climb to 1,000 meters 3.5 minutes. Climb to 2,000 meters 8.5 minutes. Climb to 3,000 meters, 14.5 minutes. Climb to 4,000 meters, 22.5 minutes. Climb to 5,000 meters, 38.5 minutes. Armament 1 times forward firing 7.92 mm LMG-08 Spandau machine gun.